Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm equally happy to, if not more happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's great to have an opportunity to. I'm glad that I like the way you structured this session so that there's lots of room at the end for discussion. So that's great. So I'm looking forward to that in particular. Yes. So today, as Elizabeth said, I'm going to be talking about interoperability in research infrastructures. And I'm going to, in particular, focus on two two things which have come out of an RDA working group. The first is MaLDReTH, which Elizabeth mentioned, which is, as she said, is a map of tools used in the research lifecycle. And the second is PRISM, which is itself a tool. It's a tool which enables MaLDReTH to come to life because MaLDReTH is in spreadsheet form. So it's not very user friendly in some ways. It presents a picture, but it doesn't allow you to really engage with the spreadsheet very actively. As you'll see, because one of my colleagues in the working group has done a fantastic video, so you'll actually see a demo of PRISM later on. So yes, so I'm speaking on behalf of the MaLDReTH 2 working group. We're now in a second year. And the other co-chairs of the group are Adam Biles-Moore. Adam particularly actually developed PRISM, which, as you'll see, is a very nice tool, which was an amazing contribution on his part. And the others are Haley Burns, who currently is with the Harvard Law Library, where she's involved in data rescue efforts. Maria Pretzeles, who works for the California Digital Library, which provide services to the University of California campuses. You may be familiar with DMP tool. Maria was until recently the main driver of the development of DMP tool. And Natalie Williams, who is with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, which is kind of the equivalent of SUNET or SURF for organizations like that in Europe. Next slide, please. Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking about MaLDReTH and PRISM and interoperability, but I want to put this in context, and I think this is very important. Whoops, sorry. Yeah. So the context that I hope we can all be thinking about today is not just isolated tools, but research infrastructures. And I'm going to actually begin by talking about the limitations that I see in some of the research infrastructures that are being built. Then I'm going to go over MaLDReTH. Then I'm going to go over PRISM and show this nice video. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the current activities of the group, because we're quite active in developing MaLDReTH, but we're also active in other areas. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the background, the deep background, the not so deep background, research institutions provide infrastructure and tools to their researchers, right? Everyone knows that. By research institutions, primarily universities as well as research institutes have been the primary providers of infrastructure and tools to researchers. SciLifeLab is unusual because it's a national body which also does that and provides services and tools to multiple universities in Sweden. That's not that common to have that kind of intermediary or national organization doing that. But I think I've always been interested in SciLifeLab. I think it's a really interesting idea. And now another kind of service provider is emerging, which are the generalist and domain-specific research infrastructures that are being designed at the EOSC and national levels, and indeed not just in Europe. So the Digital Research Alliance of Canada is also developing a national research infrastructure, and the ARDC in Australia has already developed one. So this is my personal view. I'm not actually representing MaLDReTH here. This is my own personal view. But what are some of the issues that are emerging as we move to provision of research infrastructures at a higher level, actually to the university and the researchers, not just the universities doing it themselves? Well, what infrastructure and tools are appropriate for wide adoption? There's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of tools out there. Many are very specific and specialist. Others are more generalist. There's a spectrum, right? Also importantly, how can the infrastructure and tools be delivered in a scalable, cost-effective, and user-friendly way? It's fine to have thousands of tools, but if they're too expensive to deploy, or if they're not very usable, then it's definitely not. All of us who are involved in this community aren't really getting good value for money. And finally, and critically, and this is a major focus of MaLDReTH, is how can interoperability between tools and infrastructure be achieved? So that's kind of the background to the way I at least think about these things. Next slide, please. So, as we all know, universities already provide lots of tools and research infrastructure to their researchers, and larger universities like University College London, which is this is their map of their digital of their life cycle, how they map tools in their life cycle, and you can see some of the tools that they use. They use DMP Online for planning. They use data and metadata capture tools, electronic lab notebooks. Then they also have a storage service, which is part of this life cycle in their view. And they also use repositories as well. But I think it's fair to say we work closely with UCL, so I know them quite well. I think they would admit that actually this is a nice vision of the life cycle, and there's tools they use, but the tools aren't particularly necessarily interoperable. And even the ones that could be interoperable, they haven't really linked them up in a way that allows them to be used in an interoperable fashion. Anyway, so this is an example of how one university thinks of these things. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the interesting new thing that's happening, of course, is that now you're getting these national research infrastructures that are coming. So the EOSC nodes are the EOSC node itself is being built. Then you're getting both domain specific as well as generalist nodes being built, or at least designed at this stage at the national level. As I mentioned, it's not just happening in Europe. The Canadian Research Data Platform is being, again, designed by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. The New England Research Cloud is something similar. It's a regional initiative in the northeast of the United States. So if you look at these infrastructures, they're pretty similar in a way. What people are thinking about, they're very basic. They have storage at the base. They have some file sync and share capability. And then pretty much all of them are thinking about incorporating Jupyter notebooks in some form or another to facilitate computational work. They have some HPC element. And then they have this kind of almost always this vague concept of apps. Apps like electronic lab notebooks, like repositories, like data management planning tools, like specific research tools that researchers use, like Omiro for bioimaging, for example. Interestingly, just to touch briefly in the EOSC context, the research cloud from the Netherlands seems to be playing a prominent role in thinking across EOSC about the storage layer, as is Nextcloud for the file sync and share. I think in the case of the ones overseas, those aren't coming into it. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is my personal view. I don't want to maybe slightly controversial. I don't want to say that I'm representing the MaLDReTH group here. So again, in my personal view, there are some fairly fundamental shortcomings in the way in which these research infrastructures are being designed. Well, I think as UCL would admit that these are the case these in existing infrastructures, but also in the ones that are being designed. So oftentimes a fundamental one is there's no thought of any interoperability between the storage layer and the application layer, or between the compute between compute and the applications, and even between the applications themselves. So the lack of interoperability is a is almost an Achilles heel, I would say, in the way that many of these um, infrastructures existing ones exist, and the ones that are being designed are not thinking about it enough. And so this has at least a couple of negative consequences. One is the limited ability to support research workflows, because the fact is that researchers use multiple tools. If the tools aren't interoperable, then they're not able to very effectively carry out their research workflow. So that is a barrier to uptake of services and tools, which hinders research workflows, and research workflows are at the heart of research. It also means that data is more difficult to have data and metadata pass throughout the research lifecycle. So it's more difficult for data to be exposed, shared, placed in repositories, etc. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd put this up because, and again, I was involved in this, so I'm kind of blowing my own horn here. But a couple of years ago, um, some of you actually may know Philip Konset at UIT in Norway. And Philip Konset runs the Dataverse NO in Norway, which is notably it's a national resource which is delivered for all the universities in Norway. So it's another example of this moving beyond individual universities providing services. Anyway, Philip, really kind of the Dataverse community, and Philip and I helped, but Philip did 90% of the work, put together a proposal which was called Reason, to build a national infrastructure for Norway, which actually is very similar in concept to the nodes which are now being built across Europe. Perhaps this was 2 years ago, so perhaps it was a bit ahead of its time. But I really like this graphic that we created for this. And so why do I like it? Well, first of all, it's based on the life cycle. You can see the plan and prepare, collect, and process, share, and reuse, publish. And if you look at the top section with all the apps, so some of the apps that were selected for inclusion were already interoperable. Other ones, much of the work that was proposed was to make them interoperable. So the interoperability of the apps is a fundamental part of this. Fundamental part of this design. So if you look at that, that's kind of almost very MaLDReTH-esque. This was before MaLDReTH, but MaLDReTH has picked up on the interoperability and tying into the research lifecycle. And then it was acknowledged that underlying this application layer, which was really the focus pretty much of this design, is the storage and compute. And in the proposal, we also said that there would need to be substantial work on affecting interoperability between the application layer and the storage and compute layer. So I think there's also a bit of a lesson here in that this proposal was primarily put together by the Norwegian universities, and SICT, the national infrastructure provider in Norway, was not really that keen on it. So when you think about interoperability, you need interoperability at a technical level between services and tools, but you also need interoperability between different players in the ecosystem. And I think that interoperability wasn't really there in Norway. Happily, things may have changed a bit now, I think, but at that time that was the case. So anyway, the proposal was not funded, but it's still out there, and I think it's a useful model. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a bit of background. So let's put it in context. So yes, so MaLDReTH 1 was last year. Well, actually, I think they're 18 months. So it was actually a year and a half ago, and then MaLDReTH 2 is the successor RDA working group. So MaLDReTH 1 produced the MaLDReTH map, which I'm going to talk about. This is just kind of introduction to the MaLDReTH section of the presentation. MaLDReTH 2 is doing a number of things. As we've said, we're heavily the major task really is to look at interoperability between the tools which exist now in the map. So that's one major focus. That is the major focus, I would say. But we've also been engaged in some outreach like today, telling people what we're doing. And the model is actually it's quite exciting. It's being adopted and people are using it as a reference, which is what we'd hoped. Secondly, we are also working on an integration between MaLDReTH and the GORC model. I think next month you're going to get in the seminar series, there's going to be a presentation on the GORC model. So you'll be learning more about the GORC model then. I'm going to mention it briefly today. And finally, something which we haven't really, we need to focus on, but we haven't had the time yet, is looking at sustainability and governance. And I'm not going to talk about this today, but I'll just mention now, the thing is an RDA working group is not really resourced it doesn't have the appropriate resources to maintain something like MaLDReTH and PRISM, which as you see, are quite rich tools. So one of the tasks for the working group is to try to figure out whether possibly some organization might be interested in the medium to long term of kind of becoming a home for MaLDReTH and PRISM. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. So MaLDReTH. Here it is. MaLDReTH. Yeah. So the first phase of the MaLDReTH work was to come up with what we call the harmonized version of the research lifecycle, and there's lots and lots of versions of it. They're all great. We weren't saying the others were bad. We didn't want to. We did create a new one. We didn't really want to create a new one. So this is a harmonized version of. We looked at 26 of the ones that were out there and took 5 that seemed to be the best or the most widely used, and then we just, as I say, we tried to harmonize those. So we had a starting point. So the starting point was the phases of the research lifecycle, and then there were 2 subsequent phases. And when I say we, this was a large group. I think more than 100 people participated in the meetings over the course of the year, and there was quite lively debate about things. So if you look at on the right side of this graphic, for each stage of the life cycle, so there's collect, process, etc. For each stage, we then said, all right, what are some categories of tools which are commonly used in that stage? So as you'd expect in the planning phase, data management planning tools are a category. In the sharing stage, repositories are a category. So for each phase, I think there are 11 phases. There are 3 categories of tools. And again, we decided to have 3. Sometimes but there might have been 10 candidate categories, but we tried to keep it consistent. So we came up with 3. In some cases, there were too many. In other cases, we struggled to find even 3 categories. Anyway, we consistently had 3. Then for each category, there were 3. And then we did another layer down, if you will, and said, okay, for each category of tool, let's find examples of tools which are widely used, representative, which people will be familiar to people. And so for each category, there were 3 example tools, and so you come up with 11 stages, 33 categories, and 99 tools. Next slide, please. So I'm not sure how well you can see this, but this is three to give you a bit more sense of what I was trying to say. So you can see here 3 of the phases as examples: conceptualize, plan, and collect. And then in the plan phase, you have data management planning tools, project planning tools, combined DMP and project managing tools. In the collect phase, you have qualitative data collection tools, quantitative and qualitative, and then harvesting tools, and then some examples of the tools. So that's so MaLDReTH exists. There's a couple of graphics like this, but basically exists as a spreadsheet. And that was the work of the first year of MaLDReTH 1. Next slide, please. Right. So as I said, in MaLDReTH 2, the challenge that we are trying to address is to say, okay, great, we've got this map of tools, and there's again, there are many listings of tools, but what we really want to focus on is interoperability between the tools for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. So kind of unexpectedly, one of our co-chairs, who's an extremely committed and talented person, Adam Viles Moore, created this tool called PRISM, which you're going to see a video actually a demo of PRISM, so you'll see it in action. And the notion here is to develop patterns of tool-to-tool integration. So you can see we developed a number of parameters of interoperability or kinds of interoperability. This is all incorporated in PRISM, and then we're in the process of populating information about between different tool-to-tool interactions. Are they interoperable? If so, which of the interoperability parameters are possible between those tools? And that's what PRISM is all about. And you'll see that in a minute. And this is a tool which can be, you can engage with it, you can use it, you can enter data into it, you can also explore interoperability. Next slide, please. So these are again, this has been subject of a lot of discussion, again, public community-led discussion about what are the kinds of interoperability or interaction which are relevant to thinking about interoperability between tools. So we came out with, if you look on the right column there, classification, what the group thought were primary kinds of interoperability and secondary kinds of interoperability. So the four primary ones, again, if you look on the left column there, are API integration, data exchange, metadata exchange, and file format conversion. So these are captured in PRISM. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. So this. Can you wait a sec? I'll just introduce the video. Thank you. So this is this video which Maria Pretzelis, one of the co-chairs, made, and I think it's a fantastic video. It takes about 5 minutes, but it's well worth watching and listening to. And so you'll see in this video, Maria, she's primarily demoing PRISM, but she also gives you a bit of the context of MaLDReTH and PRISM. So there's a bit of repetition or overlap with what I've already said, but I think that will hopefully reinforce what I've said as well. So yeah, we play the video and hopefully it will work. Rats. The sound is not coming through. I think that's also a setting on the sharing, and you need to share.
I will put my own sound on. I will try it one more time.
Okay.
Can you hear it now?
I want to explicitly acknowledge
Yes.
Adam Biles Moore. He single-handedly.
I will start from the beginning.
Great,
Please let me know if you cannot hear the sound.
Hello, my name is Maria Pretzelis, and I'm going to give a short demonstration of PRISM, which is the platform for research infrastructure synergy mapping. Before we dive into how it works, I want to explicitly acknowledge Adam Biles Moore. He single-handedly developed, coded, and built this application for us as a prototype for the MaLDReTH 2 working group. So whereas our first working group focused on categorizing research tools across the 11 stages of the research lifecycle, we realized that simply identifying these tools wasn't enough. We know that in the real world, these tools don't or shouldn't exist in isolation. Researchers are forced to manually move their data and metadata between systems. I also want to clarify what PRISM is not. It is explicitly not intended to be another static tools registry, inevitably going out of date in time. It's really a conceptual scaffolding, so using a representative set of tools to map out vertical interoperability. So showing how these systems and tools connect across the research lifecycle, from planning to processing to preservation. The fundamental unit of PRISM is the tool interaction. So an interaction represents a connection or an integration between two tools that enable data flow or workflow enhancement. So every interaction has a source tool. So this is the tool that is initiating the connection or sending the data, and a target tool and that is the system that is receiving the data. Directionality really matters here. So for example, pushing code from GitHub to Zenodo for long-term archiving is a very different workflow than being in Zenodo, linking back to a GitHub repository. So by mapping these specific connections, PRISM allows infrastructure providers to do kind of reverse mapping. So to look at the tools their university provides and see where their tool chains are broken, where data is getting trapped or siloed. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a new integration. So we're going to say DMP tool connecting to RSpace. This interaction type, this is metadata exchange. I add a description of this interaction here. From here, again, this is where you can add optional technical details. If you have more information on this implementation, contact information for someone who's knowledgeable about this interaction, and a few categories to help understand maturity, complexity, and or importance of this interaction. So clearly, mapping an entire ecosystem is not practical. So PRISM does support bulk imports via CSV tools. So you can export interactions, upload interactions, and of course you can also upload your tools CSV. So looking to the future, we realize that manual entry of all this information isn't infinitely scalable. We're exploring automated web crawlers and AI agents to discover potential tool interactions by scanning GitHub repositories and registries. So Adam had been looking into that work. However, PRISM is always going to rely on a human in the loop curation model. We'll always need the community to review these automated claims, to validate the technical details, and make sure that they're actually value to the research workflow. So that brings us to one of the most critical areas of our work right now is standardizing how we are defining these interaction types. So before we can build this accurate map of research infrastructure, we're really looking at determining if our definitions of interaction types and technical details, if these make sense, and how best to capture the realities of technical tools and how these tools interact together. That's it for the demo. Thanks for watching.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Maria's asleep now, I think, but thank you, Maria. So yes, so now we've seen a description of MaLDReTH. We've heard about PRISM. We've seen a demo of a PRISM. So I mentioned we're also engaged, apart from the kind of technical work with PRISM, the working group is also engaged in other activities. One of them is outreach and discovery, because to our delight and maybe surprise, we found out that people are already using MaLDReTH, which is just what we'd hoped. They're using it as a reference. So who's using it? Well, more and more designers of research infrastructures are using it. So it's being used by SURF in the Netherlands. It's being used by the group that's putting together the EOSC node. It's now being used by research.gouv in France, which is not actually, they're not building a research infrastructure. They're putting together a description of the research infrastructure that's available in France. It's being used by FEDOSC, which is a national Belgian initiative to again think about a national research infrastructure, and also, as I mentioned, by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, which is building a research infrastructure, which I think is going to be quite similar to what's happening in at the EOSC level. it's also used by organizations which already have a research infrastructure. In particular, two universities in the UK, Oxford and University College London, both used MaLDReTH to kind of assess, reference their own services and tools they provide, looking for gaps, looking for how they're doing, that kind of thing. And again, interestingly, and this is also unexpected, it's great when you do something like this project, you never really know, will anyone care? And if they care, why will they care, right? It's like building a new piece of software. You kind of hope that it might be used, but you don't really know until you get there. Anyway, it turns out that it's also of interest to others who already have directories of tools, like listings of tools. Hasselt University in Belgium has put together a tools used in I think in Flanders. Sorry, I shouldn't say Belgium. I think it's Flanders. So the Flemish universities, the ones they're using, Health RI, which is the Netherlands kind of life sciences and health organization. They've got a long list of tools that their researchers are using. And the Library of the Czech Academy of Sciences is interesting. That not only have they done a listing of tools which are used, or some of the tools which are used in Czech universities, but they've actually built kind of another MaLDReTH. They have a simple tool that you can use to query it. So we're in discussions with these other tools directories about how they can use MaLDReTH, how it's relevant to them. So in a way, quite diverse usage already of MaLDReTH. Next slide, please. And this is just to provide some evidence for what I'm arguing here. I actually stole this slide from a presentation by someone at SURF at the Open Science Festival in the Netherlands late last year. And he was describing how the EOSC EU node is being developed. And so if you remember, you might not remember, but the slide I had at the beginning on the right, the various steps are the things that the kind of things that they're planning to have in the node and to support. And then he's borrowed the MaLDReTH lifecycle to kind of illustrate the point that these things will be happening in the research lifecycle. So they are using MaLDReTH as a reference, as I said. Next slide, please. Yeah. All right. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before we can move to discussion is this GORC. So the GORC is another model. It's actually older than MaLDReTH. It was, I think, started development maybe 2 years before. So I think of we think of GORC as our elder sibling, and we're the younger sibling that's coming along and learning a lot from the GORC experience. So GORC also is well, what is GORC? So for those of you who don't know, it's again this notion of a research commons, the technical part of which is a research infrastructure. So if you look at the blue hexagons, they're technical. They're hard, real things like services and tools, research objects, compute, storage, network. These are kind of the underpinning, but the GORC model also looks at other things, the kind of software elements that would be needed to put together a research commons around a research infrastructure, things like human capacity, governance, etc. So again, next month, I think Andrew Trelaw is going to give a talk about the GORC, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it now. But the one that I want to focus on today is the services and tools element, which again is a spreadsheet. And if next slide, please. Yeah, next. I think there's some. Yeah, there we go. So the structure of the GORC it's much more detailed than MaLDReTH, arguably much too detailed, I would say. So you've got these elements. So you saw the 9 elements. Then for each element, you've got a category of things in the element, then subcategories, attributes, and features. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a click through, I think. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So this is, you won't be able to read this, but it doesn't matter. So over on the left, there's an element and a category, and then there's, more and more descriptions of these things. So in the services and tools element, it's somewhat like MaLDReTH. It's kind of MaLDReTH-esque in the sense that it's not built around the life cycle. It doesn't focus on interoperability. So those are two kind of weaknesses, if you will, but it has a listing of categories of tools and services. So in a very broad sense, it's like MaLDReTH, but a decision was taken last year that it would be useful to reconfigure the services and tools element of the GORC model using MaLDReTH. So that's another exercise that's going on at the moment. Next slide, please. Maybe, oh yeah, sorry, could you just, yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. These are someone else's slides, so they're slightly different format. Whoops. Just the one, yeah, go back if you can. Yeah. So we have a task force where the people from the two groups are working together. If you looked at second bullet point, the purpose is to try to connect the two initiatives because the same types of people are using both potentially. And as I said, in particular, the focus is to see whether we can actually, we think that in principle, having the MaLDReTH services and tools would be a more effective presentation of services and tools. So that's the work we're doing. I don't really go into it in detail. It's kind of probably too detailed to be of interest for discussion today. But that's really what we're doing. And I think that's it. So thank you for your patience in listening.